All right, so you alluded to it earlier. We've talked about some high profile areas where the quarterbacks are new faces on campus. Let's run down the list real quick of some of these other programs that have guys coming back. And before we get into kind of the rapid fire round, I want to talk about one that I think is going to that we can kind of settle in and spend some time on. And that's Jalen Hurts at Alabama. You and I both took some heat last year because neither one of us were super high on his passing ability, and it's become kind of a meme now that the guy, sort of melted down a little bit against good defenses at the end of the year. I would argue that the teams he faced earlier in the year didn't know what they had in him in terms of how to defend him with the run and force him to make some throws. We saw him really kind of look more polished during A-Day. Granted, they weren't running LSU corner blitzes at him, but he looked like he was making more accurate throws, even a little bit under pressure. We've heard some rumors that he's still scuffling a little bit this summer. So give me your thoughts on what we saw from a Jalen Hurts last year, and is there headroom for him to grow into a passer, or did he show you things last year that make you worry about him ever being that high-level NFL caliber polished passer that Alabama kind of needs in their pro-style offense?
Well, I do think he has a lot of potential to grow. And I know we took a lot of heat early last year. We took a lot of heat from Alabama fans because I was very critical of Jalen Hurts as a passer. I had been critical a couple years ago of Blake Sims as a passer in terms of what he was able to do, and there's a lot of parallels that get drawn. But, the reality is you have guys come in that are great athletes. Typically, athletes throw a hard fastball on a rope at a point, and they never really had to learn how to touch and angle the football, and so it takes them a long time to be able to develop that. And it also takes them a long time to develop the deep ball because, again, when you can throw most of the throws you make on a rope, and in the high school level you don't have guys underneath and you can do that all the time, it's a very different skill to get the ball and quickly – at that point you have to quickly set your feet, turn your body, and loft the ball to a point. And they tend not to have that skill coming out of high school. So – I think all that said, the biggest thing to me with Hurts last year was actually not anything physical because I think he has the tools, and I thought he threw a pretty good ball most of the time. It was, one, consistency of footwork, meaning because he was a scrambler and because he was looking to run, he didn't keep his feet under him and keep a solid base, and he wasn't always in a position to throw the ball. And two, it was hesitancy in throwing the football. So he didn't have a lot of confidence in his reads. He didn't have a lot of confidence or awareness of where all his routes are going to be. And when that happens, you look for where a guy should be, and then you say, okay, I found the receiver. Is he open? Yes, he looks open. Let me make sure nobody's about to run under him. There's a big difference between that and some conversations I heard Watson, particularly post-game with Deshaun Watson after the Florida State game. Deshaun Watson had a conversation where he talked about, what happened on this touchdown pass. And he said, well, I saw at the snap it was this cover, it was like a cover two concept, and I saw that they were going to drop this corner back in coverage, and then they were going to blitz the safety, and I knew because of that they were going to be able to account for this receiver. So, I knew we probably had Mike down the seam here for a touchdown. That's what goes on in the minds of most veteran quarterbacks at the college level. But to get there, it takes a few years usually of reading the playbook and reps. There was no way Jalen Hurts was going to be there because even though he is a coach's kid, even though because he is very intelligent, he simply had like 8 weeks to study, the playbook in spring practice and in summer and fall camp leading into the opening of the game. So, I think I talked about the fact that he doubled his reps by October of last year. And when you factor all that in, I think he will be a different quarterback if for no other reason than he's going to understand where his players are going to be in route-wise. He's going to understand a little bit better how coverages work and how the plays that he's trying to execute match to the different coverages. And if he can do that and get his feet better, what that's going to let him do is it's going to let him release the football when he wants to. There's been a lot of talk about Tua Tagovailoa, and I'm sure you probably have another question to ask about him. But one of the big things when you watch Tua Tagovailoa and most other really high-level quarterbacks that are passers is they can throw the football as soon as they want to. When they see a guy open, they can just snap and release it, snap and release it. Deshaun Watson could do that, and it makes it look, easy and effortless, but it's not. It's a combination of knowing where the guy is, understanding where the defenders are, and also having your feet in a position that you can rifle the ball. Hurts is still getting to the point where he can really do that effectively. But as he gets the ability to do so, he will take a significant step forward, I think, and become a significantly better passer. Go ahead.
So, I'm kind of with you on that. I saw some things last year, namely from the hesitancy that scared me a little bit if I'm an Alabama fan long term with Jalen, but the arm strength is there. And like you said, and like everybody said, we know he's a freshman. I would argue that he didn't come in as highly touted as a passer as Jacob Eason came in at Georgia as a passer, and I would argue that Hurts was probably better. Is that fair to say, that he was a better passer than Eason last year?
I don't know. I am a bit of an Eason apologist, so it's kind of a bad person to ask. My opinion on Georgia, and maybe this is here's your 5 seconds of fame if you're a Georgia fan. Georgia's issue last year is they didn't have any flipping receivers. We talked about that in our preview. I did a write-up on Georgia, and I think the phrase I used was, Georgia has all these pieces and they have the starting quarterback, and that's great and wonderful, but who's going to catch the football? Isaiah McKenzie was by no means the proper build to be a number one target and was absolutely the number one target. And the second guy, Terry Godwin, was pretty good, but beyond that, the fact that the younger Ridley was a starting receiver on that football team was honestly kind of sad for an SEC football team. And Ridley was a solid kid, but he shouldn't have been on the field for a couple years. And there's a reason he went to Georgia, which is he knew he could start immediately. And I say all that to say that I think Eason, honestly, is just a lot better than he gets credit for and was put in a really terrible position. But I will say later on in the year, if Eason continues the track he was on, Hurts could be a better passer. Because if you don't have anyone to throw to and you don't have an offensive line, quarterbacks have a tendency to regress. And I've always believed that if you put a quarterback in a bad position or you start him too early, it almost like locks in their quality. And then they never really get anywhere. Eason has a little bit of danger in that he feels like he always has to press with the football. He doesn't trust his receivers, and he doesn't trust that I can throw the ball away in first and second down, and then I'm going to have one of my guys get open for me on third down. And that tends to make quarterbacks have a lot of really bad habits over time. And also the fact that you get pummeled a lot means you don't get your feet right because you're more worried about avoiding a pass rush than stepping into your throw. So I do think Hurts can be a better kid, but I don't know. I mean, Eason was the number one prospect and a 5-star for a reason. His ceiling is, probably higher than anybody else in that class, and I don't think it's crazy to say that given his recruiting ranking.
Well, and so was Blake Barnett. But what my point was that, I killed Hurts a lot last year within the context of the fact that he's a freshman. I do think there's some headroom there. What I saw in the 8A clips from the Bama game this year were some things that really excited me about Hurts because he made some throws that impressed me. And I'm not talking about the 2 bombs that he made early that Diggs got just worked on. Poor guy. I'm talking about more some of the intermediate route stuff that he was able to complete. I think it almost looked like when Tua came in and he was slinging it around a little bit, it pushed Hurts a little more to do the whole anything you can do, I can do better. He didn't. I don't know that he had that last year because maybe the worst thing that could have happened to him was Blake Barnett leaving because he wasn't looking over his shoulder. And sometimes that can be good, but sometimes that can also be bad. And I think, and you can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, your regression point was a good one. I think that Hurts regressed a little bit, and I think that Kiffin actually contributed a good bit of that based on how he was calling the games. I feel like he didn't give Hurts a lot of opportunity to learn and, kind of grow into throwing situationally. And he leaned on his legs a little bit too much once he saw that Hurts would be an effective runner. Is there something there with that in terms of maybe he regressed because of what Kiffin was, and maybe Saban too, protecting him a little bit?
I absolutely think so. And, we talked about that, I think, a little bit last year, but probably not enough. And I think Saban said it himself, because he's said several times this offseason that, maybe we protected Hurts more than we should have, and we didn't teach him to be what we needed him to be. I think Saban, as much as Alabama fans view him as infallible, there's some things that I think he probably could do a much better job of. And one of those is, I think at times he plays the guy that makes him the best now rather than the guy that will make him the best in 3 games. And he tends to hold a few too many cards close to the vest rather than let his offense really go and be successful. And I think there was a bit of that last year, that there were a lot of times they really needed to push Hurts to be out of his comfort zone, even when they were winning games. And rather than just try to grind out a win, they needed to really push the ball downfield against some of the, quote, nobody teams. And I think they failed to do so. And I think they realized that, actually, interestingly, later in the year when they tried to throw the ball a lot, like on that, was it like UT Chattanooga they played, where they looked really bad. But the reality of it is, I don't think he developed. And I don't know if you want to talk about it, but there's actually an interesting trend in that with like first halves and second halves that Hurts.
Yeah, I do want you to talk about that, because there's a couple of things that people noticed about Hurts in terms of statistically. A lot of his passes were behind the line of scrimmage, but I think there's some other kind of behind the numbers things that would benefit from us exploring. And we talked about a little bit about this before we got started, and you did some research that I thought was pretty interesting. And really, when you present this data, I would love for you to kind of illustrate how some of the preconceptions that people have about Hurts as a passer and kind of what you found out.
Right. Well, I think the first thing here is everyone had this idea that, Hurts came in and they ran this zone read scheme and they were a run first team early on, and they threw the ball a lot, and did all these jet sweeps, and then later on they wear you out physically and they would, they would just run the clock out. And the reality is, Hurts, to some degree that was true, but Hurts strangely was a much better passer in the second half. Now, to give the statistics there, Jalen Hurts in the first half of ball games averaged 6.6 yards per attempt, and he had an average QB rating of 126. Compared against other quarterbacks in the first half of the season, that's outside the top 100, does not rank. So there were 100 quarterbacks in the country that had a higher yard per attempt average and a higher QB rating than Jalen Hurts in first halves of ball games across the year. In the second half of the season, he averaged 8.5 yards, the second half of each game. If you just look at second half of games across the season, he averaged 8.5 yards per attempt and 162 yard per attempt average. So he goes from 6.6 yards per attempt to 8.5 and 126 quarterback rating to 162. And that goes from outside the top 100 to 26 nationally in quarterback rating. It also goes, to put it in SEC terms, in the first half of ball games, he was the 14th best quarterback in the SEC. In the second half of ball games, he was the 4th best quarterback in the SEC, passing in terms of quarterback rating. And to me, I think the biggest reason for that is, in the second half of ball games, when they were running the ball more and when they were, really trying to run their power run offense, it let him be more of a play action quarterback. Because he was more play action, they were throwing the ball down the field more. I think Kiffin gets pretty weak at times when he tries to be this, bubble screen, zone read sort of passer. And, I think he kind of does himself a disservice. And with, all that hatred of the jet sweep, we talked about in the Ole Miss game last year, as I recall, that Alabama's run game, the conception was that they would run you to wear you out in the first half, and then the second half they would run you over once you retired. But the truth was the running backs were absolutely as effective in the first half when they actually got carries up the middle as they were in the second half. The difference was they just gave him the ball a lot more in the second half. In the same way, Hurts was asked to pass about twice as often in the first half of ball games versus he was in the second. And when they ran more of a power offense and they let him throw vertically, he just did better. I remember in the Alabama-Kentucky game, there was a point where Saban just chews Hurts out, and he threw the ball well. The rest of the ball game, he hit a couple deep passes, moved the ball down the field. I remember the same darn thing happened in the Tennessee game where it came in, and I know he's supposed to be stoic, but it looked like he was kind of rattled. He was very nervous. Like we said, his biggest problem is hesitancy. Like when he's rolling out on a bootleg, there were probably a half dozen times last year where he rolls out and the first read is the tight end, Howard, crossing the field. And Howard is wide open immediately. And Hurts would take about 4 steps before he'd actually throw the football. And the difference was that was the difference between Howard getting the ball inside the hash and being able to turn upfield, and Howard being at this, on the sideline trying to catch the ball as he runs out of bounds. And it's just a really big difference. And when Hurts got more comfortable and when he was being able to get in a little bit of a rhythm, he was a lot more successful. And when Kiffin ran that zone spread, dink and dunk scheme, I don't think Hurts really ever got any confidence, and he just wasn't as effective of a passer.
So I think we'd be remiss to talk about Hurts last year and Hurts' potential this year without talking about that change that he's going to have to undergo with a new offensive coordinator. In your opinion, does Kiffin – I want to look at this in 2 ways. One, does Kiffin leaving help or hurt Hurts? And 2, does Daboll, or however you pronounce his name, coming in help or hurt Hurts? Because I think we can look at them kind of in isolation.
Okay, well, I think the answer to the first question is frankly yes. Kiffin has always been very successful when he has new quarterbacks. He reminds me of a lot of offensive gurus, that a lot of those guys, I just don't know what the problem is, if they have an issue developing quarterbacks. It's like they're really bright, but they have no way to impart it upon someone else. Malzahn, most of his greatest successes have all come with guys that he didn't train. And in the same way, Kiffin, when he came in at USC and he had Barkley, did had really successful teams. And I think sometimes people forget when he left, he had this guy named Cody Kessler, who was terrible under Lane Kiffin. And ended up being, an All-American caliber player under Sarkisian years later. So I don't think Kiffin is very good at developing quarterbacks. I've heard that he was really uninvolved, almost bizarrely so, with the offense at times. And I think Hurts will be better off for that. And then the second question, whether it's good with Daboll to come in, I think the answer is probably yes to that one as well. And, well, I think you say that you have to be viewed in isolation, but I think it's obviously comparative, right? Where was he at before versus where is he at now? And you do kind of have to stack the styles and the coaches up to be able to answer that question. And, Daboll does have 3 different stints as an offensive coordinator in the NFL, so he does have experience. I think everybody refers to him as the Patriots tight end coach, and I think the prior experience is probably more notable for him. Other than just sort of understanding the way Saban operates as a, cold, heartless machine. But, in terms of style, I think a pro-style offense would be very beneficial. Now, I think this is probably a very good time to bring up an interesting point I've had, and that's this. We've talked a long time on here, and I've talked for many years, even before we started doing this podcast, that the zone spread offense is very good against bad teams, and it struggles against good ones. And I know you generally agree with this. So, here's like your little mini rant on that. The zone spread offense is designed to spread you out, get one-on-one matchups, and create space. And then it lets the other team's athletes take advantage of the space that's been created. To a large degree, there are different variations of it. The Todd Graham tree, which Malzahn picked up, is based off straining you formationally by running the zone read in the middle, flexing the tight ends constantly, and then basically hitting guys that get wide open over the top in the passing game. And that's one way to do it, where it's basically taking advantage of any sort of mistake you make, and both at the line of scrimmage in terms of gap assignment and downfield and coverage. And then you have sort of a different style of zone read, which is the Oregon zone read, and it's just about speed and basically just wearing you down until you can score. It's a little bit of a variation from that Todd Graham thing, because it's basically we're going to go so fast that we're going to wear you down, and we're going to Oregon's whole scheme is based around the fact that if they can get 4 yards per play, they're going to continue to drive the football, and eventually you're going to get tired and make a mistake. Not all that different from Auburn, actually, when it's operating. When they're like their 2013 year was more of an Oregon-style attack in that way, that they went really fast, they hammered you, and then as soon as you started to get tired, they would hit you over the top. Just Oregon's kind of in hyperspeed. And then you also have the more nouveau spread sweep attacks, which Alabama ran last year. Ohio State ran, usually has a power quarterback, and that's just about using the full width of the field in the run game. And there is a, quote, true passing game, but it's simplified for the quarterback. A lot of short to intermediate throws, and it's about trying to get their running backs in space where they can break a tackle on a smaller player. You have Derrick Henry on an outside sweep in that sort of spread attack that they ran. And it's tough for a safety to step up and tackle Derrick Henry at the college game. Not many guys are strong enough or big enough to do it. And, those teams like Alabama and Ohio State have a lot of success doing that. The problem is all of these plays rely on the fact that they get one-on-one matchups. They rely on the fact that there's space, and they rely on the fact that there's missed tackles. As defenses improve, all of those things get less and less frequent. And there's a reason why. This is why the spread offense doesn't really exist at the pro level. At least, not since that 1 year when no one had seen it before. And that's because if I'm running, a zone read and I want to have a mesh point, there's a certain amount of time it takes to snap the ball, catch it, and look at the guy to make the mesh. As the defense gets better, that time is kind of fixed by the quarterback and the running back. You can't really speed that up no matter how talented the guys are. But as the defense gets better and better, the defensive end is closer and closer when I make that mesh. And at a certain point, the defense is uncomfortably close. And if anybody messes up, he's going to hit me in the backfield. And so what is usually a play where I either have a comfortable margin to make the read, in which case I have an okay play, or I have a lot of time to make the read, in which case I can have a big play, becomes either a negative play or an average play. And that's what happened when teams played somebody like Myles Garrett or Derek Barnett last year. Or if you take a bubble screen or a little, you want to do a little outside run, zone run or a quarterback run. Once the safeties get faster and they can get to the line of scrimmage faster, the corners, especially the biggest thing really is that the corners get bigger and the linebackers get faster. Now all of a sudden the quarterback can't get the edge on the linebacker anymore. And what was a, Nick Marshall running for a touchdown becomes, Jarrett Stidham being tackled in the backfield. And that's the difference QB speed can make compared to linebackers. Or in the bubble screens, you start playing those bigger corners, they can get off blocks and they don't. Well, there's two things. One, when you get the ball, again, kind of a fixed amount of time it takes for the ball to get to the receiver. And by the time the receiver catches the ball, that corner is a step closer. And because he's a step closer, instead of you hit him, instead of him hitting you 4 yards downfield, he hits you 1 yard downfield. And because he's bigger, he takes you down immediately. And you go from 4 yards in the bubble screen to 1. And that, again, the big difference between 2nd and 6 and 2nd and 9. So all that sort of plays into it. And why do I have this huge long rant here? Because I think if you're a team that wants to win 9 or 10 games, you run the spread. Because most of the teams in college do not have defenses that are really all that good, and you can put up a lot of points. Lane Kiffin won several shootouts like the Ole Miss game last year because his offense was so prolific, and they could, against bad defenses, they could score a lot. And under Saban before, when teams scored a lot of points, he really struggled to keep up. But under Kiffin, they could win in a shootout, mainly just because that style of offense, that spread they instituted, was very good against it. The problem is, as the quality of defenses improve, the quality of your offensive play degrades at a faster rate. A pro-style offense is designed to create mismatches in space. It's designed to take advantage of formational mismatches. It's designed to create separation for receivers, to create holes for the running back. It doesn't rely on you being too slow to be there or for you to make a mistake. It creates the mistake due to the play call. And so if you're a team that wants to win a national title, what's more important to you is to beat the very good teams than to beat the bad ones. Because if you're Alabama, you just aren't very likely to lose to a Mississippi State. However, you are going to have to beat Auburn, LSU, Florida, Washington, and Clemson to end the year. And if you lose to pretty much any one of those, you're not going to win a national championship. So, if you're a bad team and you want to win 9 or 10 games, instituting the spread can get you to that point. It can get you a high win count. It can get you to a bowl if you're really bad, because it takes advantage of the bad teams in your schedule and kind of, makes you more likely to beat 8 of 12 teams on your schedule that don't have great defenses. But it also means you're more likely to lose to the other 4, in my opinion. Now, if you're a team like Alabama where, when you have a spread, you're going to beat 8 of 12 teams in your schedule even that much worse. And, Alabama's offense put up 1 billion points last year. I think they averaged 40 points a game because their spread was so effective against most of the teams in their schedule. But when they played the really good teams, they were almost putrid offensively because that style of offense just isn't as effective as the pro style. And I think Dable will make them worse against 8 of 12 teams in the schedule when they play Ole Miss and when they play Arkansas. They're not going to blow them out the way they did last year. But I think it also means when they play LSU, and if and when they get to the SEC championship or the playoff, and they play much better defenses, they're going to be better off. I think I actually have some evidence of this. So you want to discuss Allen and Hurts and the way that kind of matched up last year? Okay, so here's an interesting graphic that shows Jalen Hurts passing and Austin Allen's passing, matched up against each other versus the yards per attempt allowed by opposing defenses. And it's a scatter plot with a trend line, and it's a little cluttered, and I understand that, but that's just the way the data falls. But the gist of it is, along the x-axis, the horizontal axis, you have every opponent that they played. That's the yard per attempt that opponent allowed. So, for example, on the orange dots, which are Jalen Hurts, the orange dots furthest to the left, those are the teams that had the best yards per attempt. The furthest 2 on the left, that's Washington and I believe Clemson. And as you move further right, you get to higher and higher. So all the way 8 yards per attempt, that's the worst teams they played. Alabama has one that's above this chart. That was, I forget which team it was, but they were so bad that they're actually like they were even worse. So the question is, how does, on the vertical axis, how did the yards per attempt that the quarterback actually had against each team compared to how good the defense was? And this really, I did this because I thought it was the most prototypical pro-style quarterback and spread quarterback in the SEC, and because I figured we would have this question. But I will say I always pick these two. I always try to pick the data points I want to pick and then just run with it to see if it proves or disproves my point. Here, I think it proves it. Austin Allen had good passing games, but if you look at that scatter plot, you'll see he was pretty consistent against the best defenses he played, which are on the left-hand side of that graph. He averaged about, about 8.8 yards, 8.2 to 9.2 yards per attempt. And that's teams that only allowed about 5.7 yards per attempt. And on the right side of the graph, he actually at times did even worse. So the best team he played in terms of passing defense, he averaged only 6.7 yards per attempt. What does it come down to? It means when you put a trend line down, he averaged between 7.6 and about 9 yards per attempt, so about a 1.4 yard per attempt range, regardless of the quality of the opponent. It was a bit random game to game whether he had a good game or bad game, but how good the opposing pass defense was actually didn't have all that much significance in his play. And I think that's pretty remarkable, because if you look at Jalen Hurts, when he played really good defenses, he had very few yards passing. And when he played really bad defenses, he had really good yards passing. In fact, his yard per attempt number just pretty much straight up doubles from the worst team he played to the best. So if you played a team that was particularly bad as a pass defense, if they were about 7.5 yards per attempt allowed, Austin Allen and Jalen Hurts were about the same. But if you played a team that was really good at pass defense, all of a sudden Austin Allen is considerably better, about twice as good at yards per attempt. And I don't think it's really about the quarterbacks. I think it's about, it is to some degree, but I think it's also a lot about the style of offense they were asked to run, the fact that Austin Allen's offense was not predicated on so much on the bubble screen and little, I don't know how many pop passes Jalen Hurts had that went for long yardage. By the way, we said Austin Allen. I have to put a little jab in the Arkansas fans. The one furthest right, the dot that doesn't show up, was Arkansas, which is actually 14 and a half yards per attempt for Hurts. It doesn't even fit on this graph. And that was because they had a lot of pop passes and bubble screens that went for 1 billion yards. But when Hurts had to actually throw on 3rd and long and try to fit something into coverage, the offense just wasn't equipped to do it. And so there you have it. And if, to full circle, I think this applies for a lot of offenses in the league. And I also think this is pretty indicative of what happens when you have somebody like Malzahn that tries to pass the ball a lot. Because Malzahn, when he institutes a passing offense, he still tries to run it within his system. And he tries to run a passing game using the offense that gave Jalen Hurts this sort of really rough curve. And when Malzahn tries to run a spread offense by passing the ball a lot, he tends to fall flat on his face when he plays teams that have good pass defenses. And I think the reality is he needs to understand it's fine to have his own run game, but against good defenses, you're going to have to run the ball for scores. You can't pass it. I don't think you can ever really get over that hump unless you change schemes. So that's my long, ranty spiel on why spread offenses are very good when you're playing bad teams, and because of that, they will win you most of your games and can get you to a 9-win record with a mediocre team. But if you want to go undefeated and you want to win a championship, you got to beat the really good teams on your schedule, and the way to do that with any consistency is to be a pro-style offense.
All right, so we got to wrap up Alabama if we want to have any hope at getting to any of the other teams in the SEC. But I want to force you into a prognostication with a question. And I have one that I'm going to make as well in a little bit of a different way. With Jalen Hurts, when you're looking at him this year against just those good offenses, we know what he can do against the crap defenses of the world, but just against the good defenses, the LSUs, if he plays a Washington or a Clemson, those types of defenses that he struggled against last year. With Jalen Hurts, what he has this year, how much you think he's improved, and the new offensive coordinator situation, if you had to pick one, and I'm assuming that we see Jalen Hurts as a liability in those games last year. I do. LSU last year, I see him as a liability. This year, is Jalen Hurts in those games a liability or a weapon?
In those games, I think, it's a relative term, but I'm going to go with liability. I still think, for comparison's sake, I still think I would rather have Austin Allen than Jalen Hurts if I'm Alabama playing LSU. And that's not really a negative against Austin Allen. It's just a different skill set. But, I think that's still where I'm at.
So I'm going the opposite way, and I was just as critical of him last year as you were. I'm going to say that Jalen Hurts improves enough this year that he will play to the award that he got last year, which is SEC Offensive Player of the Year, which I don't think he won that because he was the best offensive player. I think he had the best talent around him. And that's going to ruffle a lot of Bama fans' feathers, but I don't think he was the offensive player of the year last year in the SEC. I just don't. I think he has improved so much, and he has so much better support around him from a coaching and scheme standpoint that he will statistically and in these games play to a level that will be commensurate with that award that he won last year. That I don't want to say he didn't earn it, but that I don't think he was the best player.